You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 29th of May, 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Today, Portugal's political jigsaw, the crumbling infrastructure of war-torn Sudan, and how South Korea may be stepping in to support displaced Harvard students. I'm Georgina Godwin. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you live from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. My guests Rachel Cunliffe and Sir William Patey will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll also have a check-in from Monocle's contributing editor Andrew Muller, who's in Odessa gearing up for a regional forum, and Alexei Koryalov sends us a letter from the Polish city of Katowice. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin and I'm joined today by Rachel Cunliffe, Senior Associate Editor of The New Statesman, and Sir William Patey, former British diplomat, ambassador in his time to Afghanistan, Sudan, Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and a political consultant. Thank you both so much for coming into the studio. William, we've just been talking about learning Italian. Tell me more.
Yes, no, I'm using it. As I said, we were talking about anti-dementia, staving off dementia. For me, it might be a bit closer than for some of you. So I want to spend as much time of my remaining years in Italy as I can. So I've started learning Italian as a homage to one of my favourite city in Europe, other than the United Kingdom.
Which city in Italy?
My favourite country in Europe, other than
Do you have a particular region of Italy you're drawn to?
No, I'm exploring the lot. You know, I've been in recent days to Puglia, to Sicily, to Tuscany. I'm going to Lombardy next year. I plan to do it all. Fantastic.
Rachel, what are you doing to stave off dementia?
Cryptic crosswords, which is maybe not as exciting. You don't get to tour a country doing that, but this was my New Year's resolution. My husband can do them in about 10 minutes flat, and I have slowly and painstakingly been trying to get my brain to think in 6 different directions at once. And the more you think you've got a handle on it, the more they're there to trick you. They're very tricksy.
Very, very tricksy. Well, let's start by talking about crosswords of a different variety. The final overseas ballots in Portugal's May the 18th election have been counted, and they've changed the shape of the country's parliament. The far-right Chega party has leapfrogged the centre-left socialists to become the official opposition, marking the first time in 50 years that Portugal's post-dictatorship mainstream has been broken. Founded just 6 years ago, Chega now holds 60 seats and is aligned with Marine Le Pen's National Rally and Germany's AfD. Its rise mirrors a broader European trend, but also resonates with what's happening closer to home here in the UK. Well, Rachel, Chega was founded in 2019, as I say, just 6 years ago. Now it's the main opposition in Portugal. I wonder what that rapid rise says about the political mood in Europe, and if you see echoes of this here in the United Kingdom.
Oh my goodness, the parallels are almost too stark. If it was fiction and you were writing it down, then you think it was a little bit on the nose. Just reading from the Guardian report on Chega's result, they talk about how the party has capitalised on widespread dissatisfaction with mainstream left-wing and right-wing parties. Check. As the country suffers a housing crisis. Check. Stressed health and education systems. Check. Stagnating wages. Check, check, check. Immigration. All of this. And it's the breaking down of the traditional two-party system where I think the parallels are particularly stark. I spent Tuesday, it's recess week in Westminster this week, but I spent Tuesday at Nigel Farage's press conference outlining the positioning of his Reform Party, where his message was the mainstream left and right is broken, it's time for something new, and that's definitely something that you are seeing repeated in various iterations across Europe.
Absolutely. And William, as someone who's worked in some of the world's most unstable countries, what kind of instability might we expect from Portugal now, with a Prime Minister trying to govern without a majority and refusing to work with the far right?
Well, I mean, the places I've worked haven't had democratic governments, so it's slightly different. But instability, the absence of government, can lead very quickly to deterioration in standards of living and the rule of law and all sorts of things. I agree that this is part of a broader trend. I think it was Tony Blair who coined the phrase populists exploit grievances but don't offer any solutions. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're basically seeing disillusionment with the current political system and the failure to deliver. We've got used to an ever-increasing standard of living. And that seems very difficult to keep delivering in a modern world. So it's a battle for the hearts and minds of the public. The more these right-wing populist governments get in and they're exposed for the charlatans they are, let's be clear. I mean, we've got some clear evidence in that in Britain. Nigel Farage as UKIP, now Reform, offered us all sorts of solutions if we left the European Union. That's proved to be a mirage, and I'm hoping that sort of evidence that the promises that were made, the lies that were told, people won't necessarily fall for it again, but we've got to certainly take them seriously. There is some hope in Romania. The right wing was seen off marginally, but was seen off. We saw a more moderate president elected. We'll see what happens in Poland. We've got the same fight in Poland between a right wing candidate and a more liberal candidate, pro-Russian. So there's a battle. There's a battle for hearts and minds going on across Europe, and Portugal, Spain, France, Germany, Britain, Italy. We're all in the thick of it.
No, absolutely. I mean, Rachel, as you say, Chega's success has come at the expense of the political centre. In Britain, we're seeing Labour shift its rhetoric too. It's not just reform. They are talking about Farage and reform. Is Starmer trying to get ahead of a similar populist surge?
He's trying to. I think the time for getting ahead of it possibly has passed, and we're now in the time for dealing with the reality of it. Keir Starmer has said outright, and it's maybe something that listeners have missed, but I think this is really significant, that he considers Reform to be the de facto opposition party. So even though Reform have 5 MPs and the Conservatives have 121 MPs, in terms of influence and setting the agenda and who the Labour government consider their main threat, it's Reform. And the Prime Minister gave a speech today exactly on the threat of Reform, particularly focusing on their economic policies, because, as William says, when populist parties are campaigning, they promise the world to everyone, and when you try and make their sums add up, often the money isn't there. So we're definitely seeing the political dynamic and the conversation shift here in the UK. We're also seeing the realities of governing, or about to see the realities of governing. At the press conference on Tuesday, I asked Nigel Farage what the Reform Party's plan was to deal with social care. Now they're in charge of 10 councils and a combined council budget of £10 billion. And he didn't really have an answer to that. He was much, much keener to talk about, the war on waste and immigration and all the wonderful things that Reform would be able to do. So when these parties get into power and they're up against the realities of governing, that's when voters have a chance to see through them.
In a European context, William, how dangerous is it that parties like Chega and, of course, Reform are no longer on the fringes? They're increasingly central to national debate.
Well, I mean, it's dangerous if you believe in good governance and the rule of law and economic progress and social justice. It's important because
that sounds quite dangerous to me.
Yes, I'm saying it is dangerous if you care about these things, because the parties that who are coming in are frankly economically incompetent and don't believe in all these things. But there's a good horizon for us here, because I think we will see this experiment explode in the United States. I mean, I think we've seen some blowback from Trump in America, that they're seeing that for what it is, and a failure of Trumpism in the United States may have a positive impact when it comes to the battles in Europe. But it's pretty important, and I think it's absolutely essential that a centre-left Labour Party in Britain actually manages to deliver in order to stem the tide, because it could have an impact much more broadly, and it has to address the concerns of ordinary people, which is not easy for the left, but immigration is a big concern, and the provision of public services and ending poverty are huge concerns for everyone, and that's what Labour have to focus on, delivering as much as they can while at the same time exposing the lies of populists like Nigel Farage.
I mean, is it naive to to lump the right together as this homogenous group that all believe in the same thing? Or is each country's far-right variant developing its own distinct flavour?
I think they are developing distinct flavours. And also, when we talk about left and right, we group these parties on the right. Some of their parties are economically very much on the left when it comes to benefits, pensions, and a stronger welfare state in some cases, a stronger welfare state often for citizens of that country, with obviously very different views on immigration and people who've come to the country, and differing views perhaps on who counts as a resident or a citizen. But there are different strands of this type of populism. The type of populism that we're seeing from Donald Trump and the White House, the kind of MAGA chaos, is very different from the strategy taken by, for example, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, who campaigned in a very right-wing populist way, but actually now she's in government has taken a more measured, more technocratic approach. It's different again from Viktor Orban in Hungary. So there are differences in the flavour of populism, and also differences in how it plays out when they're actually in government. And also, to go back to the idea of the effect that a Trump White House is having on parties in Europe, we should remember that it's already having a big effect on parties in other countries, Canada and Australia, who just had elections where the centre-left managed to win, in part because of a close eye on what's going on in the White House.
And William, briefly, with the European parliamentary elections on the horizon, I wonder if this all points to a continental shift away from the political centre, and if Brussels really should be worried.
Well, I'm not a great fan of European parliamentary elections. I really don't think they count very much. I still think the individual elections in individual countries are much more important than the European Parliament. Nigel Farage used to make great play about the great Parliament ruling us. I don't rate it. It's an indicator of what happened. It gave us a foretaste when UKIP won all those parliamentary seats. It gave us a foretaste of what might come. But I do think Europe has to take account of this. I actually think they have to stand up for the rule of law and for human rights in places like Hungary, where there is a commonality among some of these parties in Eastern Europe, is that the independence of the judiciary is under threat, free speech is under threat, the sorts of things we're seeing in Trump's America, and the EU has to stand up for its values. Otherwise, there'll be problems down the road.
Well, let's turn now to another place where political dysfunction has much more dire consequences. 2 years into Sudan's civil war, the country is in ruins. Sudanese authorities estimate it will take $700 billion to rebuild, $300 billion just to make Khartoum livable again. Basic infrastructure has collapsed. The capital, once the hub of public services, is now the epicentre of a cholera outbreak. And meanwhile, international aid is drying up. William, you've served in Sudan. I wonder if you can help us understand just how devastating this collapse of the infrastructure is.
Well, I mean, it's the biggest crisis that Sudan has ever faced, and this is a country that's been at civil war virtually since independence in 1956. I mean, I was there in 2002, 2005 when we negotiated an end to the civil war between the North and the South, which led to the formation of the Republic of South Sudan, which addressed that problem. It didn't address the problem that was out in the West, Darfur, which is the genesis of the current crisis, where it's the birthplace of the RSF, who are fighting the Sudanese army. I think this is not a crisis that is easily resolved. You could have a 50-year civil war in Sudan because the capital was virtually untouched. I mean, I lived in Sudan for 3 happy years in the middle of a civil war, and there was nothing going on in the capital. The civil war was somewhere else, but it's right in the heart of the capital. It's destroyed the capital. It's led to the absence of any governing functions. But until there's a political settlement, until there's a ceasefire, the war comes to an end, and there's some prospect of an agreement on a government, there's not going to be any rebuilding of Khartoum or any building of Omdurman. I mean, the Sudanese army have pushed the RSF out of Khartoum for the moment, but the RSF are attacking Port Sudan, they're attacking other areas. So we don't have a settlement. And until the regional powers stop supporting different sides, force their clients to come to some sort of arrangement. Talk of rebuilding is frankly pie in the sky. All you're talking about at the moment is how do you keep people alive? There are about 24 million people, displaced people in Sudan, who are at risk of starvation.
It's the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world today.
I mean, we look at we look at Gaza, man-made Gaza, but what's happening in Khartoum and beyond, in wider Sudan, is a catastrophe on a similar scale.
Rachel, we talk about these vast sums needed for rebuilding, but with foreign aid budgets tightening, especially in the US, how likely is it that Sudan will get the international support that it needs?
Oh, very unlikely. Partly because, as you said, the sums are just very difficult to get your head round. The Sudanese authorities are estimating that 300 billion is needed for Khartoum and 700 billion for the rest of Sudan. And as you say, we're at a point in global geopolitics where international aid budgets are the first to be cut, and where US leadership is stepping back, and other countries are scrambling and are much more concerned at the moment with defence budgets than they are with international aid budgets. If you look at the conversations going on in the UK government, for example, on the spending review that is due in a couple of weeks' time, it's all about defence. I mean, a significant chunk of our international aid budget went into defence. So the idea that we can somehow step up and fill the void left by the US, sadly, we're seeing that priorities are very different. I'm struck by this crisis in particular. A couple of months ago, I think it was in January, I went to an exhibition in Parliament by the organisation Waging Peace that had displayed children's drawings done by children who were refugees from the Sudanese crisis, and you've got children's drawings of this is my house and this is my family and this is my school and these are the soldiers who came and massacred my entire village, and very detailed child's drawings of machine guns and bullets, and it was absolutely horrific. And I just want, there's a book available, and I would recommend that people go have a look at some of those drawings just to get a human perspective on a crisis that it's very difficult to get your head around the numbers on.
William, the UN Security Council is reviewing the arms embargo on South Sudan this week, and several African states, including Sierra Leone and Algeria, want it lifted. But obviously, as we know, conflict and displacement are escalating. I wonder why some African members are pushing for the embargo to be lifted now, and if it is lifted, does that risk fueling further instability, or could it help South Sudan stand up its own security apparatus?
Well, South Sudan is another case in point. They get their freedom and become their own country in 2011, and then they embark on their own civil war, which has been virtually waging ever since it started. And it's based on tribal differences, but it's a power struggle between two men, between Riek Machar and Salva Kiir. One belongs to the Dinka, one belongs to the Nuer, and it's a struggle for power and influence and kleptocracy. I don't see how lifting an arms embargo is going to help anybody. Allowing them more arms to kill each other, I don't see how that's going to help, and it would actually complicate matters, because arms going into South Sudan would very quickly find their way into the hands of the RSF. So if you're trying to stop the RSF get more arms to prolong the war in Sudan, in the north and in Sudan proper, you certainly don't want to lift an arms embargo on the south.
Let's move focus now to a very different kind of crisis, but one that's also about displacement and how countries respond. So after the chaos at Harvard University over its handling of pro-Palestinian protests, dozens of international students have been suspended or expelled. Yesterday, Donald Trump doubled down on his decision to revoke Harvard's ability to enroll in international students. He demanded the university release a list of foreign nationals and accused it of admitting people from radical parts of the world. Well, a federal court has temporarily blocked that order, but uncertainty remains. And in response, interestingly, Korea University has announced plans to host displaced students and scholars, positioning itself as a sort of academic safe haven. Rachel, I wonder how significant Korea University's intervention is and what it signals about shifting academic power globally.
It's really interesting, and the cynical part of me wonders if the global reaction to this might have been slightly different if it wasn't Harvard. Like, Harvard is the flagship American university, and universities in other countries are rushing in to say Harvard may not want you, or Harvard does want you, Trump may not want you, we want you, bring your best and your brightest and come here. And the Korea University suggestion is that students would be able to come here even in the middle of their courses and have a transfer credit system. Undergraduates, postgraduates, lecturers, researchers, everyone just import it wholesale. Other countries are suggesting similar. Germany has suggested an exile campus and said the same thing, that exiled foreign students who had places at Harvard are welcome there in Germany. Interesting that the culture minister who said that is himself quite a anti-immigration, anti-woke figure, but has chosen to take that position. David Gauke, the former Conservative Justice Minister, who now is a columnist for the New Statesman, nice subtle plug there, I'm sure you'll agree, he suggested that we should do that here in the UK as well. So it's not just Korea, but I think Korea University's one is significant because it's very clear that the primary target of Trump's anger is Chinese students in particular, foreign students in general, Chinese students in particular. Obviously, the proximity, that's a statement from Korea University right there.
And William, what are the broader diplomatic implications of Trump's stance on foreign students, especially for US soft power and for things like research?
Well, it's a spectacular own goal. I mean, if you said to yourself, well, what we're going to do is we're going to stop the brightest and the best coming to our universities, contributing to our knowledge and our progress. It's a bit like Oxford and Cambridge saying, we won't have any more foreign students because we don't like foreign students who have views of their own. And indeed, it's a spectacular own goal, as is closing down PBS, as is closing down the Voice of America. It'd be like the British government closing down the BBC, closing down, shutting off foreign students from Oxford and Cambridge. So it's a spectacular own goal, and I think it'll have profound implications in the longer term for the United States technological lead, which is what it's always had. I think the Koreans, I think William Hague, the new Chancellor of Oxford, said we'll take them. The other universities are going to take advantage of this, and there might be a brain drain. And it won't just be foreign students. There'll be researchers at Harvard whose funding has been cut. There'll be lecturers. There'll be the brightest and the best will be looking for other places. And Korea might be an option, but I suspect Oxford and Cambridge might seem slightly more attractive to them, English-speaking, similar cultural basis. So I think there's an opportunity for Britain here to sneak in and get some benefit.
Well, I mean, and as other universities follow Korea's lead, what do you think it means for global student mobility? Particularly as we were discussing, you're seeing right-wing governments come in who are trying to clamp down on immigration in many places.
And not just right-wing governments. So the Labour government here in the UK put out its immigration white paper a couple of weeks ago, and that included restrictions on foreign students and restrictions on how long graduates from overseas could stay in the UK after they finish their degree. So on the one hand, you've got William Hague, David Gauke and others saying this is a great opportunity for British universities to lure over some top Harvard academics, although we should also say that we really don't pay them anywhere near the amount that the Americans do. But maybe that's a side issue. On the other hand, you've got the Home Office with a very tight grip, or wanting to have a very tight grip on numbers, and the tension between those two forces. I mean, I completely agree that it's an own goal for US soft power, American influence, shooting themselves in the foot, and all the rest of it. But I think it's possible that we underestimate here how much the Trump MAGA project just hates the university system and hates American elite universities for all kinds of reasons, but sees them as hotbeds of left-wing radicalism and also as alternate power centres that could challenge the authority of the White House, and therefore is quite happy to tear down centuries of American dominance in global academia if it means that the threat to them is lessened. And I think that's really sad and really depressing.
And we shouldn't forget, of course, that Trump had his own university which was shut down, and that his son Barron is at NYU, reportedly because he didn't get into Harvard. Finally, William, how does this play into a wider US policy shift on, for instance, immigration, but also national security?
Well, it's hard to. Where do you begin? I mean, we've got a Trump assault on the elite, as Rachel was saying. He doesn't like Ivy League universities. He didn't go to one. His son didn't get into one, and it's a hotbed of Democrats and liberals, and produces the sorts of lawyers he's also trying to intimidate. I mean, it's become very political, and I think the security implications of all this is going to be very difficult for European, for American diplomats, British and European diplomats, to project globally the values we have long supported. Institutions, free speech, separation of the judiciary, free from political interference, those sorts of values are no longer. You wouldn't be credible if you were an American diplomat and trying to promote those values anywhere else. And if you were a British diplomat trying to do it, they'd say to you, "What about America?" So they're weakening the system of liberal values that we sought to promote, and that's making it easier for authoritarian regimes to thrive, to do the things they want to do, and that's undermining the global order, and we're moving into a new world in which might is right, and international law is something you can mess around with, and indeed you can even sanction people who are suggesting that international law is adhered to. I mean, we're in a strange new world, which is very, very worrying.
Absolutely. So, William Patey, Rachel Cunliffe, thank you both very much indeed. Now to Odessa, where Monocle's contributing editor Andrew Muller is gearing up for a day at a regional symposium. Andrew, I understand that earlier you spoke to one of the organisers.
This is Alexei Goncharenko, he's a Ukrainian member of parliament. He's from an opposition party, but he is the local representative here. I went to visit him in the outer suburbs of Odessa at one of the Goncharenko centres, which he operates all over the country. It was an interesting insight into how Ukraine has adapted, because he established these as literacy and educational hubs. They're basically places where people can sign up to learn English for free and learn how to drive cars and basic things like that. But as he was showing me around today, they have a crew of very dedicated older women who spend their days making camouflage netting for Ukrainian soldiers elsewhere. And they've sort of set up an array of 3D printers, which make grenades which can be attached to drones and flown over Russian positions closer to the front line. So that in itself was pretty interesting. But I did ask him, like all the obvious questions you would ask somebody in his position, along the lines of how long can Ukraine possibly keep this up? It has now been more than 3 years, to which his answer was basically, we don't have a lot of choice.
I can see that. And of course, there's a breaking news line today about a new maritime security hub in the Black Sea. What can you tell us about that?
It does seem that the EU has at last noticed the extremely obvious about the Black Sea, which is that it is a clearly extremely important part of the world in terms of both trade and security where Europe is concerned. It is worth bearing in mind that before the war, and to a lesser extent since it started, Odessa, where I'm speaking from, was one of the world's major outlets for transporting grain. The sort of the vast reserves of Ukrainian grain were almost all shipped out of Odessa. So the idea is that there will be what they're calling a maritime security hub. And there, at the moment, I think there's a lot more rhetoric than reality. There's an amount of blather about enhancing situational awareness and so forth. But I think it is a statement of intent that just as in recent years we have seen the Baltic Sea more or less become like NATO with the addition of Sweden and Finland to the alliance. This is making a similar statement about the Baltic Sea, which is, well, give or take, Ukraine is already like NATO, given that it's otherwise bordered by Romania, Bulgaria and Turkey.
Of course, Turkey particularly is waiting to join the EU, so I wonder how those Black Sea regions will engage with the bloc.
Again, people have different ideas about what the Black Sea region's future is going to look like. I mean, the MP I mentioned earlier that I spoke to, Alexei Goncharenko, has a slightly ambitious view of things. He believes that there will be no peace in the Black Sea until Russia has no Black Sea shoreline, which obviously would involve dismembering those parts of Russia which do border the Black Sea and somehow setting themselves up as independent states. I think he understands that this is probably more easily said than done. There is an opportunity here, I think, for the EU and for NATO, because Ukraine has demonstrated in 3 years that Russia, certainly in the Black Sea, is not the naval power which Russia might have believed itself to be and which its adversaries may not have believed it to be. They have more or less succeeded in losing a maritime war to a country which doesn't really have a navy.
Andrew, I wonder if you could give us some more general impressions from Odessa. What is the mood there?
It's funny. Life very much goes on. I mean, you could spend quite a few hours wandering around Odessa without really thinking anything much was askew. It's a really pretty city. The bars and the restaurants and the shops are all open. There are people out in the parks enjoying the summer. And just every so often you get brought up short. In the square where there used to be a statue of Catherine the Great, there's now a really rather touching improvised war memorial, just lots of Ukrainian flags inscribed with names and dates commemorating people who have died in the last 3 years. And just, even little details in the hotel, the sign in the lobby directing downstairs to the shelter, the fact that by the bed they give you a set of earplugs in case you'd rather just sleep through it. And you're also encouraged to download the app which keeps you up to date with air raid alerts, because obviously the skies over Ukraine are constantly monitored, and in recent days there's been some of the heaviest missile and drone attacks of the war. These do go off. There's been 2 today, but everybody seems to be over it. It is extraordinary what people can get used to. And I think over the last few years, Odessans have just kind of figured out how to get used to it.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. And I understand you'll be joining us on the briefing tomorrow to bring us up to date with events in Odessa. Andrew Muller there. Finally, on today's show, our weekly Letter From segment. And this week, it takes us to the Polish city of Katowice. Here is Monocle's Alexei Koryalov.
Central Europe is a place where toponymy has always been rather fluid. There's hardly a major town or city in the region that hasn't changed its name over the centuries, depending on which empire happened to be in charge. When independence arrived, it often brought with it a new name, or rather a return to an older, vernacular one. Place names carry weight, the weight of culture, politics and history. I recently travelled to Katowice, the capital of the historic coal mining region of Silesia. Now firmly part of Poland, it has at various times belonged to both Austria and Germany, each of which still refers to it as Katowice. But it went by another name too, bestowed by a rather different master, Stalinograd, in honor of Joseph Stalin. There were 5 other Stalin cities scattered across the Eastern Bloc, but Katowice's case is rather special. It held the name for just 3 years, from 1953 to 1956. By contrast, Kuchove in Albania remained Stalin city for a staggering 40. Katowice wasn't even first in line in Poland. Apparently, party apparatchiks had originally set their sights on Częstochowa, some 80 kilometers to the north. But they ran into a problem. Then as now, the city was home to the venerated medieval icon of the Black Madonna, a painting of the Virgin Mary holding the baby Jesus. And so Katowice it was. Today there's little to remind you of its brief spell as Stalinograd. Even the city museum devotes only a tiny corner to the period. But a few relics remain. Clothes, books, birth certificates, train tickets, even the odd bit of cutlery, all stamped with Stalin's name. Seeing them made me think of that familiar old trick used by those in power, asserting control over a place by renaming it. It's a habit that still has its adherents. Vladimir Putin, for one. The Russian president has repeatedly denied the very notion of Ukraine as a distinct nation. Instead, he has referred to its eastern and southern regions by their old imperial name, Novorossiya, or New Russia, a label first used by Catherine the Great in the 18th century. And then there's Donald Trump and his attempt to buy, or otherwise acquire, Greenland. One congressional bill backing the idea even proposed renaming it Red, White and Blueland, which rather makes it sound like the place the Blue Meanies came from in Yellow Submarine.
What's the matter, fellas? Blue Meanies?
This business of renaming isn't just anachronistic, it's deeply presumptuous. Redrawing the map shouldn't be the whim of a single man. It should reflect the will of those who actually live there. And as the case of Katowice shows, that will always resists imposition. For Monocle Radio, I am Alexei Korolov.
And thank you, Alexei. And that's all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. A big thanks to all my guests today, Rachel Cunliffe, Sir William Patey and Andrew Muller, as well as Alexei Korolov. Today's show was produced by Laura Kramer and researched by Francesca Gilks. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu. I'm Georgina Godwin here in London. And the Monocle Daily is back at the same time tomorrow.